Hey guys, welcome back to another Dragonheir Silent Gods video. Today I'm going to be talking about my opinion of the best 3 epics per element. So of course this opinion will differ to others, but these are a group of epics that I've personally used throughout the season, some of which I actually haven't used, but I know their value. So I'm just going to kind of give a bit of a recap now season 1's coming to an end on my server of which heroes I think are the standouts for season 1. Obviously, we don't know what's coming in Season 2 exactly yet. We don't know how things are going to change, so this may not carry over as being relevant to Season 2. But for the options we've got for Season 1, and now I know obviously more about what we've experienced, this is my thoughts on who is worth investing in. I know at the moment, as it stands, everybody's going to be starting on Season 1, even new players starting, say, next week. So covering Season 1 and the best heroes to use for that is incredibly important. So if we first of all just go straight over to the gallery, we'll have a little look at Fire first, obviously first in line. So Fire, for the 3 options I picked, first one is one I've used basically everywhere, and that is Adolphus. So when I first got Adolphus, I didn't realise how powerful the shields were, but upon some testing, it's crazy to see how big the shields he actually gives are. So with his ultimate skill, as you can see here, he deals damage and places a shield based on his attack and his enlightenment to all allies. Based on their health and his enlightenment to all allies. So the shields that you can get from this are absolutely massive. So I've kind of got mine built with high enlightenment, some attack, but mostly sustain, and he's putting out like 35 to 40,000 health shields every time. On his battle skill as well, he grants a single target shield and also increases the ultimate energy by 15%. This can be a little bit annoying when trying to tune places like Vortex, but overall the shield obviously does come in clutch and helps keep your team alive. On his passive skill, he heals the targets if they've already got a shield when he places them. So the healing that he'll be doing is based on 75% of the shield he's giving. As I said, obviously the shields he gives are huge, so this is a large amount of healing. He's actually the top healer in nearly all content I use, based on obviously the support he's giving from his shields and the healing he's getting to put out if they've already got shields. So overall, Adolphus is one of my favourite heroes of Season 1. Like I said, use him everywhere. So definitely worth to consider levelling up and using an Adolphus if you've got one. I have booked mine and did instantly as soon as I realised the value of him. So next up is Tonnonen. So Tonnonen is one of the best options for wild team DPS, especially, well, only really for single target, but Tonnonen does a huge amount of damage. So on Tonnenen's ultimate skill, they grant 20% attack up for 10 seconds and deal 5 times 160% attack. So this is huge and scales so well, especially when we talk about the passive skill in a minute. So Tonnonen grants a huge amount of damage for your team. As well as that, on the battle skill, deals damage to a target 3 times. The higher the number difference between the buffs on the hero and the target, the higher the damage. So if you've got a good amount of buffs, obviously, and the target has no buffs, you're going to deal a huge amount of damage from this skill. But the passive skill is what makes Tonnonen so good. So first of all, it grants an extra 20% crit rate. So you don't have to build for 100%. You only need to build for 80%. And every time a ally has a successful wild check, Tonnonen gains 5% crit damage. This stacks up to 20 times. So in your build, you can push a load of attack because your crit damage is going to be amplified by this passive skill. This does mean that it is almost vital to pair Tonnonen with other wild heroes to obviously get this buff out quicker. But as long as you can hit 20 stacks on this, your Tonnonen will almost certainly be your top damage unless you've got some crazy legendaries, especially Flora. As it stands, Tonnonen is one of the best options for wild damage dealers, so definitely bear Tonnonen in mind while building a team. Next up, we've got Dane. So Dane is a very strong damage dealer, deals AoE damage. He's actually labelled as a support. This is mostly because of the debuffs he brings. So on his ultimate skill, he has a 75% chance of dispelling 2 buffs from enemies within range, and also has a chance of inflicting attack penalty when targeting enemies when targeting enemies with 50% HP. He also steals all of their buffs instead of only 2. So Dane does a huge amount of damage with this skill, but also enables heroes like Sigrid. So if you've got a Sigrid built and you're looking for a strong debuffer, Dane can be a great option there, because not only will he inflict the debuffs, he will also deal a huge amount of damage to go alongside it. On his battle skill, he deals damage to enemies within range, and obviously deals more damage if they have less than 50% HP, but also has a chance of inflicting fear and heal prohibition. So he just helps to keep your targets controlled, helps to stop them receiving any healing. On his passive skill, whenever he deals damage to enemies with less than 50% HP, he recharges his ultimate energy by 15%. That can only be triggered every 5 seconds, but overall, if you're hitting a large group of enemies, you're able to recharge and get through that ultimate skill even faster than baseline. His aura isn't that important. It gives 30% attacks at all allies in City of Trials, so this is the Pillar of Trials. So it's quite niche, you don't need it that often, but if you are looking for an aura in your Pillar of Trial team, Dane can offer you that. So next up, if we move over to Ice, we've got a few that need covering. So first of all, everybody knows about Varesh. Varesh is incredibly good. Once again, a very good debuffer for Sigrid. You'll find that in a lot of these top tier epics. But Varesh hits all targets, no matter where they are placed. So each time he uses his ultimate skill, it's going to hit 3 times and inflict buff prohibition. Varesh is an incredibly strong option for the defense penalty artifacts, whether that be Witch's Remains or Crown of the Unclean, the epic version. With a multi-target hit, Varesh just has more chances to place that defense penalty, but also deals huge damage. On his battle skill, deals damage to a single target 3 times. Each one has a 50% chance of dispelling 1 buff from them. This can be incredibly useful in areas like Grave of Curse, where the boss has buffs that you need to get rid of, as well as the Ancient Battlefield, where you want to control the buffs on the boss. But one of the most important things about Varesh is every time he attacks, he heals the ally with the lowest HP by 70% of the attack. This can only trigger once when dealing damage to multiple targets, but obviously with you hitting 3 times on the ultimate skill, 3 times on the battle skill, you're getting a good amount of healing out from Varesh. So he's a perfect hybrid between a healer, support with the debuffs he's bringing, but also a great damage dealer at the same time. Obviously, Varesh is considered one of the best options for epics in the game, and actually who I started with the game through the pre-launch event with the Horn. I was lucky enough to get Varesh, so I started the game instantly with Varesh, and I've used him ever since. Next up, we've got Rava. So Rava is a really good option for bringing freeze to your team, frost debuff for your teams. So on his ultimate skill, he summons a Nexus that deals damage for 10 seconds every 1.5 seconds. It has a 75% chance of placing frost. Upon expiration, it will explode, dealing a good amount of damage to all enemies within range. The battle skill is once again another option of placing the frost debuff. And also on the passive skill, for every enemy inflicted by frost, he gains 15% attack up, and it can stack 3 times, so up to 45% attack. Obviously, Rava can do some good damage himself, but the biggest thing is the enabling for enemy or allies who scale from frost, whether that be a legendary like Oster, for example, or the rare Usha. So there's some really good synergy that can be had with Rava, and definitely worth considering building. Next up, we've got the Necrosis element. So we've got 3 here that I've picked out. So first of all is Zaloth. So I've used Zaloth quite a lot. Very similar to Varesh in the way that Zaloth does a good amount of AoE damage, but also provides some healing. With his passive skill, every 4th basic attack heals the ally with the lowest current HP by 300% of the attack, and also has a chance to silence the enemy for 5 seconds. So obviously with Varesh, where he deals with buff manipulation, Zaloth deals a huge amount of control. So his ultimate skill deals a huge amount of AoE damage every 1 second throughout the duration, over the course of 5 seconds, but also inflicts fear on enemies for 5 seconds and heals all of your allies in the same time. Each hit of this skill increases the healing by 15%, so if you're hitting multiple targets, you're going to get a good amount of healing out of this. On his battle skill, he inflicts recharging speed penalty and an AoE to enemies within range of that. So this is obviously really good for helping to control your enemies. Make sure you can kind of keep them under control while either killing them off or getting more control out. In terms of aura, 24% attack in all battles is incredibly strong and worth considering in all areas when you're using him. So overall, Xaloth is just an incredibly strong option. One of the best epics going into this season, and having used him towards the later end, I definitely agree that Xaloth is incredibly strong and worth building. Next up, we've got Questa. So I don't have Questa, but I have faced Questa in many areas, whether that be Arena, Fey Meander. But the biggest thing, in my opinion, with Questa is the attack penalty whilst also dealing a good amount of damage. So if you look at Questa's ultimate skill here, she jumps towards an enemy dealing 950% attack and stealing 30% of the ultimate energy, also healing her by 475% of her attack as well. So this hits incredibly hard. 950% is no joke of a multiplier, but also keeps enemies under control with the ultimate energy. On her battle skill, this is where she becomes incredibly valuable. So she charges towards an enemy with the lowest current HP and deals damage with a 75% chance of inflicting attack penalty for 5 seconds. So this is incredibly strong in Arena, where she can jump to obviously the enemy nukers or your nukers if you're against her. But this is so strong for the continental bosses and the chaos shadows that you'll face in month 2 and 3 of season 1. So Necrosis is quite limited for options for attack penalty, and there is a few budget teams that work around Questa that can easily hit the 22 million damage breakpoint for the top rewards in the chaos shadows. Realistically, Questa is kind of the core of that team. She does most of the damage, as well as keeping your team alive with the attack penalty. But lastly, on her passive skill, whenever an enemy dies, she grants recovery over time to allies for 10 seconds. This is particularly strong in Arena, where you are killing people frequently. But the aura is also scaled for Arena, so 30% attack in Grand Gladiator Arena battles just helps her to kill off the squishy enemies in the backline quicker. So Questa is a great option. I would have loved to get her this season. Unfortunately, I wasn't lucky enough to, but hopefully I'll pick her up in season 2. So the last epic I'm going to cover for Necrosis is Thea. So Thea is incredibly strong with dealing with debuffs. So on her ultimate skill, she grants invisibility and debuff immunity to all ranged allies for 10 seconds, and then deals damage with a chance of inflicting healing prohibition. With skills upgraded, this is an initial recharge of 9 seconds, allowing her to get this off incredibly fast. So she's incredibly annoying to face in Arena, but incredibly good for areas of the game where you need to deal with debuffs. So whether that be Grave of Rot, whether that be the Chaos Shadows, or also the Copper Dragon endgame boss at the end of Season 1, she really does it all. Obviously, she is only protecting ranged allies, so you want to kind of prioritize ranged here instead of melee. Unfortunately, if you're using a tank, they won't be protected by her, but often that's not necessarily relevant. Keeping your ranged and your damage dealers alive is the biggest priority if your tank can stay alive without worrying about the debuffs. On her battle skill as well, whenever she's using this, she's going to heal the ally with the lowest HP and all allies with invisibility. Obviously, that's placed from her ultimate, and that scales on her enlightenment and her attack. This can only heal each ally once per cast, so if one of your ranged has the lowest current HP and invisibility, they will not get 2 heals, only the 1. On her passive skill, she grants invisibility to the hero to herself for 5 seconds whenever taking damage higher than 10% of her max HP. In addition, allies under invisibility will take 15% less damage, so she's just helping to mitigate damage constantly. Obviously, with her ultimate skill giving invisibility to all ranged, it's effectively a permanent 15% damage reduction for your team, especially if you time it for the right moments where she's where the damage is going to be particularly high. So Thea remains a very strong option for controlling debuffs and keeping your team alive. I used mine a lot towards the end of the season, and she was in one of my Copper Dragon teams as well. So next up, we're going to move to Radiance. So Radiance, there are 2 options that I've used here, one that I don't have. So first of all, we're going to look at Garius. So Garius is an incredibly strong tank. I think the only thing that could make him better is if he gave attack penalty for your team, but I'm sure many of you have faced Garius either in the arena or used him yourself. He is so hard to kill. So his aura gives 24% defense to all allies in all battles, so it can be used anywhere. His passive skill, whenever taking damage, he has a 50% chance to gain 1 stack of defense up permanently. This can be stacked up to 20 times and is completely undispellable. Each time it gives 2% defense, so effectively in a long fight you're going to get 40% extra defense for him. His battle skill deals damage to a enemy with a 100% chance to knock them up in the air. This just makes them unable to use their basic attacks or cast skills, and also grants hit recovery to himself for 10 seconds, which will restore his health every time he's being attacked. His ultimate skill is really what he's all about, so he dispels all debuffs from himself and heals all allies by 600% of his defense. So if you're building Garius with a large amount of defense, obviously as you will to keep him alive, plus the 40% he's getting from his passive, this skill will fully heal almost everybody in your team every 20 seconds. Obviously that can be reduced from skill haste as well, but Garius is an incredibly strong option. I actually use him in my Vortex team with Dauntless without using attack penalty because his healing keeps me alive enough time to get the damage I want to achieve. So yeah, Garius is an incredibly strong option, and I know he's a favourite of many people. And in fact, many people picked him up from the Epic box that we were able to buy for $1 as well. So next up is Catherine. So Catherine is a really strong healer from the Radiant faction, a Radiant element, sorry. So her ultimate skill heals all allies within range by 10% of their max HP, which also scales from her Enlightenment as well, and grants debuff immunity for 10 seconds. So there are so many areas of the game where you have to worry about debuffs at specific timings. Having Catherine using this skill just before that happens allows her to control that and make sure you don't get those debuffs. So that is incredibly strong. On her battle skill, she heals the ally with the lowest HP by 15% of their max HP and scales from Enlightenment as well, and grants them defense up 2 for 5 seconds. That increases their defense by 60%. This can be really useful for example, keeping your tank alive, giving them some extra mitigation as well going forward after that heal. And on her passive skill, whenever an ally's HP is fully restored, 50% of the overflowing healing is converted into a shield for 10 seconds. So overall, Catherine's just a great support. She's got some good healing, she's got some debuff management, and also she is going to give you some shielding too if you're overhealing with her, so don't worry too much about timing your skills perfectly if you're not too familiar with the skill timings. Next up, we have got Hegio. So I don't actually have Hegio. I wish I did. I would have used him for the Pillar of Trials for Radiance and Lightning because of the AoE damage he puts out. So if we look first at his ultimate skill, jumps to the target area, dealing 550% attack to enemies within range. If he has rally buff when unleashing the skill, it will deal 50% more damage, which is absolutely huge. His battle skill, he launches 2 attacks on the target, each dealing a good amount of radiant damage. The second attack recharges the ultimate hero's energy by 20% and has a 50% chance to grant himself rally for 10 seconds. So he's effectively enabling himself for the damage bonus on his ultimate skill. But with his passive skill, he has a 50% chance of granting rally to a random ally for 10 seconds every time he casts a skill. So he can help to enable the rest of your team if you're using other rally heroes, which I strongly advise you do. Obviously hitting that 5 elemental bonus is incredibly strong. But he works incredibly well either on his own as a solo damage dealer or in another team, in a team with other rally heroes. That battle skill, passive skill, really can help to keep the damage bonuses up for the rest of your team. Obviously, all rally heroes do scale from having that rally buff, whether it be increased damage or increased ultimate energy. It is so important to make sure you're getting good coverage of that, and Hegio can help make that happen for you. So next up, we're going to the lightning element, and unfortunately 2 of the 3 that I'm going to talk about here, I haven't had the luck of pulling. So first of all is Shoutar. Shoutar is incredibly strong for derivative damage. So on his ultimate skill here, he enhances all allies with lightning force, granting them blessings of the thunder. So whenever they're launching basic attacks, for example Dauntless heroes, they're going to be doing this all the time, there's a 30% chance of summoning a lightning strike. So that will deal derivative damage. And also Dauntless heroes have double the chance of triggering this effect. So if you think about how frequently Dauntless heroes actually attack, a 60% chance of summoning a lightning strike every time, you're going to get a huge amount of damage if you're running multiple Dauntless heroes with this, alongside Shoutar. Obviously, like I said, this is derivative damage, so it cannot crit and it gains an Enlightenment bonus. So building Shoutar with a huge amount of Enlightenment, it's going to see your damage soar. You're going to do so much damage in situations like Vortex, where you're running 2 Dauntless heroes alongside him. he will almost certainly be your top damage dealer, unless you have some of the crazy legendaries like Avelios or Nazhenka. On his battle skill, he grants a lightning shield and 15% attack up to an ally for 4 seconds. So the lightning shield once again deals derivative damage to nearby enemies every 0.8 seconds. Once again, this scales with his enlightenment and his attack, so you want to make sure both of those stats are nice and high. On his passive skill, he has a 30% chance of releasing chain lightning to enemies whenever dealing basic attacks. Once again, that is going to deal derivative damage, and that can bounce up to 4 times among enemies at most. So overall, Shoutar is just a great damage dealer, and if you've got him, you're almost certainly going to want to use him in a Dauntless team to get the full benefit out of him. Next up is Iola. So I, once again, don't have Iola. If I did, I'd use her so frequently because of the amount of debuffs she's able to do and the amount of control she puts out. So first of all, we'll look at her passive skill. So whenever she's attacking an enemy under silence, she has a 40% chance of changing that silence into a stun debuff. That prevents the target from launching attacks or casting skills. On her battle skill, she fires 2 lightning orbs at the enemy, each dealing 200% lightning damage, with a 50% chance of inflicting silence. Obviously, remember with her passive skill, that has a chance to then turn that into a stun as well. But on her ultimate skill, she attacks the target area 3 times, each dealing lightning damage to enemies within range, with a 50% chance of inflicting silence and a 75% chance of inflicting attack penalty. So not only are you going to be bringing a incredibly valuable debuff with attack penalty, you're also getting the chance to control all of the targets within that area. It does cover a very large range as well, so a very high chance of AoE stunning or silencing the entire enemy team. Iola is incredibly strong, and she also deals a good amount of damage, but she's a great option for the artifacts that place defense penalty too, whether that be the epic Crown of the Unclean or the legendary Witch's Remains. I would use her so frequently, especially in Fey Meander, where control is imperative, if I had her. So I really hope I do get her next season, because she will be getting a lot of use on my account. Next up, we've got Nathaniel. So Nathaniel's one that I actually only started using towards the end of the season. Obviously, I've been using Adolphus in lots of areas, but Nathaniel I kind of brought in as a substitute for this for my Lightning and Radiance teams. So on his passive skill, he whenever a buff expires or is dispelled, he heals the ally with the lowest current HP by 5%. That can only be triggered every 1 second, but obviously that's going to be ready very frequently. On his battle skill, he dispels 1 debuff from all allies within range and grants them a stack of recovery over time for 5 seconds. That's going to restore 1.5% of their max HP every second. Obviously, over 5 seconds, you're getting a nice little amount of healing here, but most importantly, you're dispelling a debuff, whether that be defense down or something more kind of more annoying, like attack penalty to reduce your damage. But either way, Nathaniel is great at controlling debuffs with this skill. His ultimate skill, though, is where he is really what he's really all about. So he deals damage to enemies within range and grants a 10% max HP, and that scales on Enlightenment Shield. That also grants defense up 1 to all allies for 10 seconds, and each enemy hit by this skill increases the amount of shield being placed. So he is a great option. He doesn't do as much shields as Adolphus, but he is incredibly strong for helping to keep your team alive in a Dauntless or Radiant situation. So I invested in him for the Chaos Shadows and was not unimpressed at all. I ended up actually using him for a while in the Vortex as well to deal with the defense penalty and also to help keep my team alive. So Nathaniel is an incredibly strong option and definitely one worth using. Lastly, we'll move on to the poison element. So there are 3 here. I'm pretty sure everybody knows who I'm going to say is the first one before I get into it, and that is Frobath. So Frobath, in my opinion, is the best epic in the game. He just brings so much. So first of all, if we look at his defense aura in dungeon battles, 24% is no joke. It's going to really help keep your team alive. His passive skill is whenever he's dealing damage to enemies under debuffs, he has a 30% chance of healing the ally with the lowest HP by 150% of his defense and dispelling 1 debuff from them. The more debuffs on the targets, the higher the healing amount, and that can only be triggered every 1 second. Realistically, that's always available. On his battle skill, he generates a healing nexus around himself for 6 seconds, healing allies within range by 50% of his defense every 1 second. This skill does so much healing. He is capable of solo healing a Vortex team till very high stacks, and obviously in dungeons, if you can kind of stack your team around him, he will help keep your team healthy for nearly all content. On his ultimate skill, he attacks enemies within a wide range, dealing damage and inflicting attack penalty 2 for 10 seconds. Once again, this is one of the most vital debuffs in this game, so making sure you've got somebody who can consistently place this on all enemies, especially the big version of 50% attack, it is so important, and Furabath is capable of doing that job for you. Overall, I think Furabath ticks almost every single box outside of damage, and is definitely worth throwing into any team where you can make the most of him. The only other thing I would say is if you are contemplating whether you should pick Furabath from the $1 Epic box, yes. If you don't have him already, he is going to slot into so many of your teams and help propel your account to the next level. Next up, we've got Vikuk. So Vikuk is a hero that I've used in quite a lot of areas as long as there's debuffs to worry about. And so he's a healer who also deals with debuffs. So if we first of all look at his passive skill, whenever he's inflicted with a debuff, there's a 100% chance of inflicting an accuracy penalty on the debuff caster for 5 seconds. This can just help to mitigate some of the debuffs you're going to be facing. Obviously, reducing the amount of accuracy the target has is just going to help you resist some of them, but that's not too important. On his battle skill, he does attack penalty 2 for 5 seconds. So pairing him with somebody like Furabath, you're going to have a really good uptime on attack penalty, because this is going to go out and then you can time Furabath's ultimate to go in and kind of top that debuff up, by which point this is probably able to rotate back around and place attack penalty again. But the bread and butter of Vikuk, and really his biggest value, is his full map, full board heal, and also dispelling 2 debuffs from all allies. So for each debuff dispelled, you're going to deal more healing from this skill. The amount of healing he does actually isn't that big, but the biggest thing is the debuff control. So it's very rare to find healers that can dispel 2 debuffs from all allies, no matter where they're positioned. So Vikuk is a great option, whether that be for Grave of Rot, whether it be for some of the more endgame content like the Copper Dragon. Vikuk is a great option and definitely worth considering building. So the last epic that I'm going to cover today is one that I don't personally have, and that is Corrin. So Corrin is incredibly strong as a poisoner, whether that be to amplify the damage from other heroes like, say, Vicana, the legendary that's going to deal derivative damage based on the amount of poisons being put out throughout her ultimate skill. So if we look here at Corrin on his battle skill, passive skill, whenever an enemy inflicted with poison dies, their poison spreads to nearby enemies and deals derivative damage to, deals enlightenment scaling damage to them. On his battle skill, he launches 3 venomous attacks on the nearest enemy, dealing damage and inflicting poison for 15 seconds each time. So this battle skill will place 3 poisons on a single target. And on his ultimate skill, he refreshes the duration of poisons on one enemy, then triggers a poison explosion 1 time and spreads their poison to nearby enemies and deals a large amount of AoE damage. So poison explosion is all to poisons on the target immediately triggers damage once. Obviously, this is not too big of an issue in terms of maintaining poisons, because the poison duration is also being refreshed on this skill. So Corrin is a great option for placing a large amount of poisons, helping get your team's damage up, and also, obviously, he can work as a solo damage dealer if you're looking for a poison damage. So that is all of the epics I'm going to cover today. These are who I consider to be the strongest 3 per element for Season 1. This all may change in Season 2, we just don't know. But if you're looking for help in Season 1 content, have a look through this and see if there's somebody in this list who you've got who can help to take your account to the next level. But that is all for this video, guys, so thank you very much for watching. If you are enjoying the content I'm putting out, please do remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.